So most of the founders that we talk to only use their appointment setters for one simple thing, which is maximizing how many new appointments they can set. And it makes sense on the surface because their job is literally called appointment setter. But here's what we keep seeing across all the teams that we help build and run. The teams that only use their appointment setters to book more calls on the calendar are only getting a fraction of the value that this role can actually produce for the sales organization. They're simply optimizing for the wrong outcome. And if you use your setters the wrong way, you're going to end up with a lot more sales activity. You're going to see pings in Slack of new calls getting booked, a busier calendar, less available slots, and you're going to have a feeling that a lot is happening. But it doesn't always translate proportionally into more revenue for the business. And the numbers that are downstream in the sales process are going to stay flat no matter how many calls get booked. But when you use a setter in the right way, every single downstream metric is going to move in the right direction. The utilization rate of the close rate is going to go up. The show rate goes up. The offer rate goes up. The close rate goes up. The cash collected per call goes up. And there's the real kicker. The amount of money that each closer on your team is able to collect every month is going to drastically increase. Now, if you're new to the channel, my name is Bendik and I run closing consulting. And literally all we do every day, all day is building, staffing, and running sales operations for a variety of high-ticket info, coaching, and service businesses. And collectively, our teams have done well into the 8 figures in collective revenue, whether it's on offers around $3,000 or upwards of $20,000 and above. And my goal with this video is for it to be the last video you ever need to watch to truly understand how to use appointment setters in your business to drastically increase the revenue your team produces without adding a bunch of headcount. Now, the entry-level way to use an appointment setter is to give them a list of leads and tell them go book as many calls as possible. And to be clear, that is better than nothing. Whether it is your own calendar or you have a sales team with open slots, using a setter to fill those empty slots with new appointments from leads that you have already paid for is going to be a huge needle mover for your business because it does not cost you any more ad spend. You have already paid for these leads, so you don't need to spend more money on ads to generate more appointments. You have an appointment setter doing this for you, and you only pay commission when they book meetings or when they close. Like, this is about as free money as you're going to get in your business. But there is a way to approach this role that the best operators understand, which is fundamentally different, and it has an even bigger impact on your revenue. Now, the goal is not just to book more calls on the calendar, but actually to optimize for how much cash is collected per hour that the closers have available on the calendar. This means to make sure that every hour your closers have available on their schedule is filled with prospects who are likely to show up, qualified to buy, and in turn help the closers produce as much revenue and cash for your business as they can humanly do every single hour that they have available. And with that perspective on the role, everything about how you manage your setter and how they fit into your business is going to change. So their job description changes, how you train them changes, the KPIs you track change, and most importantly, what the setter actually does in the day-to-day has to change entirely. So what does the role actually look like when you run it this way? Well, there are 4 things that a setter should own. And I want to walk you through each one because understanding all 4 is actually what separates a sales operation that can scale, cleanly and in a lean way from one that ends up staying stuck or just ends up with a bloated sales organization where no one really makes that much money. And this is the foundation of understanding how to use appointment setters as effectively as possible in your business. So let me start with how we actually measure an appointment setter, because the metrics that you track is going to determine the behaviors that you get. Now, most teams track only one number, appointment set. How many new calls did the setter book this week? And like I said, it does matter, but on its own is what we call a quantitative metric. It tells you the sheer volume of activity that has been done, but it tells you nothing about the quality. And I'm going to come back to this later, but this is fundamentally the reason why only looking at this number doesn't make sense and will likely just lead to creating more chaos downstream in the sales process. So here are the 4 numbers that we track across every setter team that we run. Now, the first of the 4 is, of course, how many appointments are getting set from the leads that are coming in. We already talked about this and everyone tracks it, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time in explaining what we do with this number here. And so the second KPI is what we call calls qualified. And so when a prospect books themselves onto the closer's calendar, we always have the setter reach out and get in touch with them before they get to speak to the closer. So this KPI tells you how many of those inbound bookings that the setter was able to get in touch with, qualify, and actually confirm is going to be worth keeping on the calendar. And having a proper qualification process here of all the calls that book themselves on the closer's calendar is simply one of the most important things you can do to make sure you have a good show rate and a good offer rate on the calls that come on the calendar. And I'll break down exactly what the process of qualifying them looks like in a little bit. And the third KPI we track is calls canceled. So how many calls did the setter remove from the calendar, either because they couldn't get in touch with the prospect and could see that they were unlikely to show, or because they spoke to them and they just weren't a qualified fit. Now, this number being high or low doesn't really tell you if the setter alone is doing a good or a bad job. You have to look at it in the context of your specific lead flow, because if this number is high and we're canceling a lot of calls and the setter is doing their job properly, it just means that the quality of the input from marketing isn't that good. There's plenty of unqualified leads who are making it onto the calendar. People book calls with very low intent and aren't actually planning on showing up or let alone buying in it. And if this number is low, that can mean that marketing is sending really good input. So people pick up the phone when the setter reach out, they are qualified, and it just makes sense to keep them on the calendar. And what this benchmark should be is going to depend on your offer and your lead sources specifically. And the fourth KPI we track is offers made per scheduled call. This is the North Star. It's the most important metric you can track on your setter team. So if every call that ends up on the calendar, how many result in the closer actually making an offer? And so it bundles together show rate and offer rate, both of which sit directly within the setter's control. And when this number is high, it means that the closer is spending the majority of their day having conversations with people who are engaged, high intent prospects, and actually qualified to buy something. But when this number is low, it simply means that the setter isn't properly filtering the calls that make it onto the closer's calendar. And that leads to hours of the closer's day being wasted on calls that were never going to produce revenue. And that is a huge opportunity cost. And these four numbers together give you the full picture of what your setter is actually doing. And the four responsibilities I'm going to walk you through map directly into these KPIs. And one more thing that's worth mentioning before we get into those is that there are other metrics that we do track on setters, like how many dials they make, how many pickups they get, and how many conversations they have. But those are what we call input metrics. So they show you the activity that the setter is putting in. And the four metrics that I walked you through right now are output metrics. So they show you what the setter is actually producing for the team and the impact that they're having. And so to keep things simple, we're just going to focus on those for today. So the first responsibility of a well-run setter is calendar hygiene and qualification. And this maps directly onto the calls qualified and calls canceled metrics that we talked about earlier. And as we talked about, most founders really just have their setters start their day by going out and booking more calls. But in our teams, and from my experience, that should not be the priority. Instead, it starts with protecting the closer's calendar. So every day, the first thing the setter should do is to go through every call that's booked on the calendar, whether it's for that day or in the future, all these calls that have not yet been qualified. And then for each one, they reach out and then get in touch with the prospect to either qualify and confirm the appointment, or they go ahead and cancel it. Now, if someone doesn't respond after 2 attempts, we both call them and we text them, we're gonna mark that slot as free on the calendar. You can just go into Google Calendar, click on the appointment, and change the status from busy to free. Now, when doing that, we haven't canceled the call yet, but we do open that slot for someone else to book over. Because once we have tried twice to confirm and we still haven't heard back, the probability of that person showing up, getting offered, and potentially closing is just extremely low. And so we would rather get a fresh appointment in that slot. And if we try a third time and we still can't get a response, we're just gonna go ahead and cancel the appointment. And this is the point where we track the calls canceled as part of the KPIs. Now, when the setter does get someone on the phone, this is where the real work happens. And so there are 3 things that the setter needs to do on every single call they make. And so the first is to check whether the prospect is objectively qualified for your offer. And how exactly you do this is obviously gonna depend on what you sell. So you need to get clear on what are the objective criteria that has to be true for someone to not only be able to buy your product or service, but actually also get a good result from it. Now, for one of our clients who teaches people how to invest in real estate, the prospect needs a high enough income level to actually get financing and enough capital to finance a property. And if they don't have that, there's very little that we can do for them. And for a B2C offer, it might be as simple as whether or not they can afford the program. And then for a B2B offer, it might be several more specific criteria, like what kind of business it is, how many employees they have, what their revenue size is, what their growth capacity is, etc., etc. But you get the point. You got to define those criteria up front, and then the setter's job is to check against them on every single call. And that is how you qualify a prospect. Now, the second is to check how educated they are. Because if someone knows nothing about who you are, what you do, or how you help people, they are not going to be ready to buy. They are just going to sit around on a sales call, feel overwhelmed, and say that, you know what, I need to think about it. Not because the closer did a bad job, but because the prospect had too much new information just hitting them all at once, and honestly not enough time to process it. So this is where the research material that you put together for your offer becomes incredibly valuable. And back in the day, you could send a reminder email to people and just hope they showed up. But what works really, really well now is creating material that people can use to actually educate themselves on who you are and what you have to offer between booking a call and actually showing up for it. I'm talking about things like long-form YouTube videos, breakout videos that answer specific objections and questions people have before getting on, and all kinds of other resources that actually address the most common concerns that people have. And the setter's job is to figure out how much this person already knows and then send them the right material to fill those gaps before they ever speak to a closer. And the third thing they have to do is to evaluate how much the prospect actually trusts you. Because even if someone is qualified and well enough educated on what you do, if they don't trust you, they're not going to buy. And so the setter needs to get a feel for where that trust level is. And if there is a gap, this is where social proof does a lot of the heavy lifting. So the setter should send them case studies, testimonials, or review pages on like Trustpilot or other platforms where you have a lot of reviews. Just anything that gives the prospect proof that you are who you say you are and that you have genuinely helped people who are in their situation get the result that they want. And one thing that we've seen actually works really, really well is that if the prospect is not educated enough or there's not enough trust built, and the call is coming up later that day or the day after, we've actually had a lot of success pushing that call back like 1 or 2 days, giving them a little bit more time to go through the material. And so that when they do get on the call, they're actually warm enough to get pitched. So when the setter has done all these 3 things, the prospect coming onto the closer's calendar is going to be qualified to buy, educated on the offer, and has a level of trust in the company. And that combination gives them the optimal likelihood of showing up, getting offered, and actually closing on the call. And it means that the closer is not starting from zero every single time they speak to a new prospect. And this is one of the most overlooked parts of what a setter should actually be doing. And it's also why on one of the accounts we took over where there was no setter in place and the team was just letting anyone book over and hoping they would show up, show rate was sitting around 41% for a whole year. And when we installed the setter and made calendar hygiene and qualification the first job of the day, show rate consistently jumped around 60%, with confirmed calls showing up closer to 80% of the time. And that is roughly a 50% relative increase. So we didn't change the offer, we didn't change the ads, and we didn't change anything about the closer team. But this one change alone increased the potential revenue per closer by 50%. So more people showed up, and the people who did show up were more educated, more trusting, and more qualified than before. And so offers made per scheduled call went up significantly. Closers spent less time with unqualified prospects and getting no-showed, and we could start scaling ad spend without needing to add more headcount. So once the closer's calendar is protected and every single booking has been qualified or marked as free, the setter then moves to filling those empty slots. And in order to have the highest output possible per hour when your setters are calling to generate new appointments, you need to have a clear priority hierarchy for them to follow. One that starts with the most valuable leads that have the highest probability of turning into qualified shows. You never want to leave it up to the setter to decide where to focus next. So it has to be a clear structure that everyone follows always. And that is how we get consistently good output. And here's the priority hierarchy that we use across all the teams that we run. First is fresh inbound leads. Now, if your funnel captures both opt-in leads and applications, you want to focus on applications first because these are the highest intent leads. The more action someone has taken towards booking a call, the higher their intent and the higher the quality is going to be. And the less they've done to end up in your CRM, again, vice versa, the lower the quality and the lower the intent. So you want to start with the freshest applications first and then move over to the freshest opt-ins after. And this is where speed to lead becomes critical. So how fast are you calling a new lead that comes into your CRM? Because the longer you wait, the colder they get and the lower the probability of getting them to book a call. And depending on the lead quality and the offer, we typically call applications 3 to 5 times before abandoning them. And for opt-ins, we usually keep that to 3 attempts because the intent is going to be a little bit lower. Now, the second priority is leads who have shown some form of response. And I want to be clear about what I mean here. If you have an active back and forth conversation with someone in your messaging platforms, those conversations gets prioritized before you even start making dials. But beyond that, there are people who may have responded once in the past, are not actively responding now, but they did show some sign of intent at some point. And so you want to work through these, clear out each stage of the pipeline, and either get them on the calendar or move them to an abandoned call. You do not want these leads to just be sitting and collecting dust somewhere in the CRM. Third priority is reason no-shows and reschedules who never got back on the calendar. And these are people who went further down the process towards booking a call, but the fact that they did not show up tells you their intent is lower than a fresh inbound lead. And if a setter still has time left after working through all of that, which is honestly pretty unlikely, then they go back to the older pipeline. And so past buyers of low ticket products, old applications that were previously abandoned, leads from old campaigns, etc. And there should always be something for a setter to do, but the output from this activity is going to be significantly lower than everything above it, which is exactly why it sits at the bottom of the hierarchy. Now, the third responsibility is documentation. And this is one that most people running sales teams have never even thought about as part of the setter's job. So imagine you're a closer and you have 2 different setters booking calls onto your calendar. The first setter confirms the call, you open the CRM, look at the notes, and all you see is something like, seems like a good prospect, booked him for Thursday at 5 p.m. That's it. You have nothing to go from. And you're walking into that call completely blind with no idea who this person is, what their situation is like, or how to best run the conversation. So when you get on the call, you end up asking a lot of the same questions that the setters just walked through. And for the prospect, it just feels unproductive, answering the same things twice. And it's very easy for them to tell that the setter and the closers are not really communicating with each other. And frankly, it just makes the whole thing feel less professional. Now, the second setter confirms the call, you open the CRM, and you can actually read a thorough summary. It explains who the prospect is, what their situation is, and what they're hoping to achieve. And also, what are the problems that they're dealing with and what they're hoping that you can help them solve. And lastly, what are the resources they've already sent them, and whether or not the setter trusts an issue or an education gap, and any early signs of objections that came up. And maybe there's a partner who needs to be involved in a decision, and the setter already told them to bring that person on the call. Now you actually understand who you're about to speak with, so you can have real context going into the meeting, so that when the prospect gets on the call, you can recap a lot of what they already discussed with the setter, which just immediately gives the impression that your team actually communicates, that you're organized and professional, and that this is not just a sales process where nobody talks to each other. And instead of repeating the same questions, you pick up exactly where the setter left off, and so you can go deeper into the conversation. And the call just ends up feeling more productive to the prospect because they generally feel heard. And this is just the first part of how documentation works in the sales process. Documenting qualified calls so the closer can walk in prepared. Now, the second thing is documenting disqualified calls. And this is equally important, though almost nobody does it. So when a setter disqualifies a lead and cancels the call, writing detailed notes on why is not just good housekeeping in the CRM, but it's actually qualitative data for your marketers. So as the setters document the reasons why leads are being disqualified, patterns are going to start to emerge. Things like they're objectively unqualified, they don't have the budget, they're looking for something cheap and you have a high ticket offer, or they have a specific misconception about what you do. And this becomes valuable for the marketing team to see what they can tweak. So they can go in and read these notes directly, or just export all of it, run it through an AI tool to get a weekly report on what the setter conversations are actually revealing about the lead quality. And they can finally understand what is making someone good enough to book in with a closer, and what is making people unqualified. And with that information, marketing can start adjusting the messaging and targeting to filter better at the top of the funnel, so that the quality of input coming to the setter improves over time. And this is the systems thinking that most businesses completely overlook. And without it, marketing and sales just live in two separate silos. So marketing optimizes for cost per lead and cost per call without any visibility into what is actually happening once those leads come in. But then when the setter documents properly and data is sent back to marketing, you finally have a feedback loop, and so marketing is no longer flying blind. And they can optimize for quality, not just volume and cost per lead. And because of that, the entire operation is going to get better results over time, and you can start scaling your ad spend. And so the entire acquisition system is going to get better over time, making it easier to scale. So let me come back to where we started and just tie everything together. So most teams measure their setter on only one specific thing: how many appointments they set. And like I said at the beginning, this is purely a quantitative metric. It tells you about the volume of activity and nothing about the quality of the work that they have done. And when you only optimize for this number, you get a setter who books as many calls as possible and does nothing else. Calendar hygiene and managing the calendar doesn't happen. Qualification of self-booked appointments doesn't happen. And documentation of the calls also doesn't happen. So again, the end result is that the calendar fills up, the closers get busy, but all of the downstream numbers in terms of actually closing people and collecting revenue is just going to stay flat. But when you optimize for your setter producing on these four metrics, everything is going to change. Appointment set tells you that the setter is doing outreach and generating new calls from the leads you've already paid for. And that matters, but it's only one piece of the puzzle. Calls qualified tells you the setter is getting in touch with self-books, checking them against your qualification criteria, and only keeping the right people on the calendar. And this is where your show rate starts to drastically improve. And then calls canceled tells you that the setter is actively protecting the closer's time. And in context with your lead flow, it tells you something important about the quality of what marketing is sending you. So if this number is high, your leads are going to need more filtering at the top. And if it's low, marketing is doing a good job and the input is of high quality. And then finally, offers made per scheduled call ties it all together. And when this number is high, qualified prospects are showing up, they are educated and trusting enough to get pitched, and the closer is spending the majority of their day in conversations that can actually lead to a deal closed and produce revenue. And again, when this number is low, something in the three responsibilities of the setter is broken, and now you have a clear diagnostic of figuring out exactly where that is. So this is what it looks like to run an appointment setter the way the best operators do. Not just filling up the calendar with as many calls as possible, but owning the entire quality of what the closer touches. Now, if you want to learn more about how we build and run high-ticket sales operations, you can check out more of the free content on this channel. And if you're either still in a founder-led sales stage, somewhere between $30,000 to $100,000 a month, or you already have a team in place and you're doing consistent six-figure months and you're looking to scale, but no matter where you are, you feel like sales is the thing that's holding you back and you want some help implementing this, then head over to closingconsulting.io or check the link in the description. You can book a free sales audit with us, and that's where we're going to show you exactly what is happening in your sales operation, where the gaps are, and how we can potentially help you fix those leaks so that you can start scaling your revenue. And if you're a seller or a closer looking to come work with us, we're always looking for great talent. So there's also a link in the description for you below. Anyways, I hope this video gave you more clarity on what the actual role of an appointment setter should be inside of a high-ticket sales operation. And on this channel, I'm going to keep sharing exactly what we do inside of our sales teams and what we learn along the way. So go ahead and check out some of the other videos that we have.